Do you feel like you're in a constant brutal race against everyone else for a limited slice of the pie? A race for jobs, clients, and resources? What if that entire race is optional? What if the masters of wealth aren't running the race at all because they're playing on a completely different field? A field where there is no competition and the supply is infinite. Consider this carefully. While you exhaust yourself trying to outmaneuver rivals, there exists a plane of operation where rivalry itself ceases to exist, where the very concept of beating someone to an opportunity becomes absurd, and where your success depends not on another's failure, but solely on the clarity of your own vision. This is not motivational fantasy. This is the scientific principle that Wallace D. Wattles called the creative plane, and it stands in stark opposition to the competitive battlefield where most people unknowingly sacrifice their energy, their peace, and ultimately their potential for true wealth. The pain you experience is not merely the fatigue of hard work. It is the specific exhaustion that comes from the competitive mindset, the deeply embedded belief that for you to win, someone else must lose, that supply is fundamentally limited, and that you must therefore be constantly vigilant, constantly comparing, constantly afraid that someone faster or smarter will claim what should be yours. This mindset manifests as stress that never truly dissipates, envy that poisons your relationships, and a gnawing anxiety that whispers you are never doing enough, never moving fast enough, because somewhere out there, your competition is gaining ground. The modern business world has elevated this competitive consciousness to the status of virtue, teaching you to obsess over market share, to study your competitors' every move, to position yourself strategically against them, to find their weaknesses and exploit them. In essence, to make rivalry the center of your professional existence. But Wallace D. Wattles, writing in the early 20th century with a clarity that has never been surpassed, taught something radically different. He revealed that this entire competitive paradigm is the path of effort, limitation, and occasional failure, a path that might yield results, but will never yield the kind of wealth that flows effortlessly and abundantly. The true science of getting rich, Wattles explained with mathematical precision, operates exclusively on what he termed the creative plane, a dimension of consciousness where you are not fighting for existing wealth, but creating new wealth from an infinite source. This is the reverse bridge. While contemporary business culture tells you to sharpen your competitive edge, the masters of true abundance were teaching that the edge you need to sharpen is not against others, but toward your own creative vision. The promise before you is not merely an improvement in your competitive strategy, it is a complete transcendence of the competitive paradigm itself. You're about to learn how to make the critical mental shift that moves you from the exhausting battlefield of competition to what can only be described as the creation studio of abundance, where your results are limited only by the scope and clarity of your vision, not by the actions or abilities of others. In this elevated state of consciousness, you do not scan the horizon for threats. You look inward to the blueprint of wealth you are about to manifest, and you understand with scientific certainty that what you create cannot be taken, diminished, or blocked by any external force, because you are drawing from a source that is, by its very nature, inexhaustible and responsive only to focused thought. This is the fundamental choice that every serious seeker of wealth must eventually confront. Will you continue to operate on the plane where most people struggle, or will you elevate your consciousness to the plane where the masters create? The decision is binary and the consequences are profound. Wattles did not present this as philosophy for contemplation. He presented it as science for application, a set of principles as reliable as the laws of physics, waiting only for your understanding and implementation. The pact I offer you now is this. In this video, you will learn the scientific difference between the competitive and creative planes, understanding not just the theory, but the precise mechanics of how each operates and why one leads to scarcity while the other leads to abundance. You will discover the three-step process to permanently shift your mind to the creative plane, transforming yourself from a fighter for existing wealth into a creator of new wealth, from someone who takes from a limited supply into someone who manifests from an unlimited source. This is not a metaphor. This is a description of an actual mental operation that, once mastered, changes everything about how you approach your work, your goals, and your relationship with money itself. Each step will be detailed with precision, giving you not vague inspiration, but concrete mental techniques that you can begin applying immediately. Techniques that have been tested across more than a century and have proven themselves in the lives of those rare individuals who understood what Wattles was truly teaching. But I must warn you of something critical, something that will be revealed in part 4 of this teaching. There is a subtle mental habit, an action that most people consider a sign of intelligence and prudence, that instantly drops you back onto the competitive plane and shuts off your creative power like a switch cutting electricity to a machine. This habit is so common, so seemingly reasonable, that you almost certainly engage in it regularly without recognizing the damage it does to your capacity for wealth creation. The masters knew this trap well, and Wattles named it explicitly, but most readers of his work miss its significance entirely. When I reveal this critical error later in this video, you will likely recognize yourself in it, and that recognition will be the beginning of your liberation from the competitive prison. For now, I ask you to engage with this teaching by reflecting honestly on your own mental patterns. How much of your day is spent thinking about what your competition is doing? How much energy do you expend monitoring their prices, their strategies, their successes? How often does the thought of a competitor achieving something trigger anxiety, envy, or the urgent feeling that you must now react, adjust, or accelerate your own efforts? Comment below with your honest assessment, because this self-awareness is the first step toward the shift we are about to make together. The creative plane awaits those who are ready to stop fighting and start creating, and your willingness to examine your current position on the competitive battlefield is the sign that you are ready for elevation. Wallace D. Wattles built his entire science of wealth upon a fundamental dichotomy, a distinction so sharp and so consequential that understanding it fully is, in itself, a form of liberation. He identified 2 distinct planes of consciousness upon which human beings operate when seeking wealth, and he insisted with unwavering clarity that these planes are not merely different approaches to the same goal, but are, in fact, entirely different realities that produce entirely different results. The first plane, which he called the competitive plane, is the dimension of consciousness in which the vast majority of humanity operates, often without ever questioning whether an alternative exists. On this plane, the world is perceived as containing a finite supply of wealth, a fixed quantity of resources, opportunities, and success that has already been created and distributed, waiting only to be claimed by those quick enough, strong enough, or clever enough to seize it before others do. This competitive consciousness is rooted in a perception of scarcity that becomes self-fulfilling. Because you believe the supply is limited, you must fight for your share, and because everyone else also believes the supply is limited, they too are fighting, creating the very competition that seems to validate the original belief in scarcity. It is a closed loop of thought that traps entire civilizations in unnecessary struggle. In this paradigm, wealth is fundamentally a zero-sum game, meaning that every dollar you gain is a dollar someone else loses. Every client you win is a client your competitor loses. Every opportunity you seize is an opportunity denied to another. The implications of this worldview are profound and corrosive. It means you can never fully celebrate another's success without feeling it diminishes your own possibilities. It means you must constantly guard what you have while aggressively pursuing what others have. It means your peace is always conditional upon your position relative to others. The emotional foundation of the competitive plane is fear and lack, a perpetual anxiety that whispers, there is not enough, that you must hurry, that you must be vigilant, that relaxation is dangerous because in the time it takes you to rest, someone else is advancing. This fear manifests in countless ways. The business owner who cannot sleep because they are worried about what their competitor is planning, the employee who sees every colleague as a potential threat to their position, the entrepreneur who feels a spike of panic every time they see someone else in their industry succeed. Wattles observed that this competitive mindset, while producing some results for some people, is inherently limited and inherently exhausting because it requires you to maintain a constant state of defensive aggression, always looking over your shoulder, always measuring yourself against others, never able to rest in the security of knowing that what is yours cannot be taken. But Wattles revealed a second plane of consciousness, one that operates according to entirely different laws and produces entirely different results, the creative plane. On this plane, the world is not perceived as a collection of finite resources to be fought over, but as being made from a formless, intelligent substance that is infinite in its nature and responsive to human thought. This is not merely a more optimistic view of the same reality. This is a description of a different reality altogether, one that becomes accessible only when consciousness shifts from the perception of limitation to the perception of infinite possibility. On the creative plane, wealth is not finite. It is created continuously from this formless substance by the process of impressing a clear thought upon it, much as a sculptor impresses form upon clay or a composer impresses melody upon silence. The creative plane operates as a positive sum game, meaning that wealth created by one person does not diminish the wealth available to another, because the source from which all wealth is drawn is inexhaustible. When you create a new business that serves people in a novel way, you have not taken anything from anyone. You have brought something into existence that did not exist before, adding to the total wealth of the world rather than merely redistributing existing wealth. This understanding changes everything about how you approach your work. You are no longer in competition with anyone because you are not trying to claim a piece of a limited pie. You are baking an entirely new pie, one that reflects your unique vision and serves a unique purpose. The emotional foundation of the creative plane is faith and abundance, a deep trust that the universe is not a place of scarcity, requiring constant vigilance, but a place of infinite supply, requiring only clear vision and purposeful action. Wattles was emphatic that these two planes are not theoretical constructs, but actual dimensions of operation that produce measurably different results. The person operating on the competitive plane might achieve success, but it will be success that requires constant effort to maintain, success that is always threatened by the actions of others, success that brings with it a proportional amount of stress and anxiety. The person operating on the creative plane, by contrast, achieves success that flows from their own creative power, success that is independent of what others are doing, success that brings with it a sense of peace and certainty because it is based on the scientific principle that thought, properly directed toward the formless substance, must manifest as form. This is not wishful thinking. This is the description of a law as reliable as gravity, a law that Wattles insisted anyone could learn to use once they understood it. The shift from the competitive to the creative plane is not a matter of learning new tactics or strategies. It is a matter of fundamentally changing your perception of what wealth is and where it comes from. As long as you believe that wealth is a finite resource that exists out there in the world, already created and merely waiting to be claimed, you will remain trapped on the competitive plane, and all your efforts will be colored by the anxiety of competition. But the moment you truly grasp that wealth is created from an infinite, formless substance by the power of focused thought, you step onto the creative plane, and competition becomes irrelevant because you are no longer trying to get what someone else has. You are creating what only you can create. This shift is not easy because the competitive mindset is deeply conditioned into us by culture, education, and the example of those around us, but it is possible, and it is the key to the kind of wealth that is both abundant and sustainable. Wattles taught that the formless substance from which all things are made is not dead matter but intelligent energy, responsive to thought, waiting only for clear direction to take form. This means that your relationship with wealth is not a relationship with a finite external resource, but a relationship with an infinite creative power that flows through you when you align your consciousness with it. On the competitive plane, you are always at the mercy of external circumstances, always dependent on being faster or smarter than others, always vulnerable to being outmaneuvered. On the creative plane, you are the source of your own wealth, limited only by the clarity of your vision and your willingness to act upon it with certainty and faith. The question is not whether you are capable of making this shift. The question is whether you are willing to release your grip on the competitive mindset that has been taught to you as the only way to succeed. The dichotomy Wattles presented is stark and uncompromising. You cannot operate on both planes simultaneously. You cannot hold a vision of infinite creative possibility while simultaneously fearing that your competitor will beat you to market. You cannot trust in the abundance of the formless substance while simultaneously believing that there is not enough for everyone. The two mindsets are mutually exclusive, and attempting to straddle them results only in confusion and inconsistent results. Wattles demanded that his students make a choice, a conscious and deliberate choice, to abandon the competitive mindset entirely and commit themselves fully to the creative mindset, trusting that the principles he laid out would prove themselves in practice. This choice is not made once and forgotten. It is made continuously every time you notice your mind slipping back into comparison, anxiety, or the fear that someone else's success diminishes your own possibilities. Understanding this dichotomy intellectually is the first step, but it is not sufficient. The competitive mindset is not merely an idea you hold. It is a pattern of thought that has been reinforced thousands of times through repetition, observation, and cultural conditioning. To shift to the creative plane requires more than understanding. It requires practice, discipline, and a willingness to catch yourself every time you slip back into competitive thinking and consciously redirect your mind to creative thinking. Wattles provided specific techniques for making this shift, techniques we will explore in detail, but the foundation of all these techniques is the clear understanding that these two planes exist, that they operate according to different laws, and that you have the power to choose which plane you will operate upon. The masters of wealth have always operated on the creative plane, whether they articulated it in these terms or not, and their abundance flows from this alignment with the infinite source of all supply. The competitive plane is the plane of effort and limitation. The creative plane is the plane of creation and abundance. The competitive plane requires you to constantly monitor and react to what others are doing. The creative plane requires you to focus solely on your own vision and bring it into manifestation. The competitive plane makes your success dependent on another's failure. The creative plane makes your success dependent only on your own clarity and action. The competitive plane is exhausting and anxiety-producing. The creative plane is energizing and peace-producing. Wattles did not present these as equal options with different pros and cons. He presented the creative plane as objectively superior in every way, the only path to true wealth, and the competitive plane as a trap that must be escaped if you are to realize your full potential. The choice is yours, but the consequences of that choice are not a matter of opinion. They are a matter of scientific law. The question you must ask yourself with brutal honesty is this: which plane have you been operating on? When you think about your business, your career, your financial goals, is your mind primarily occupied with what you are creating, or is it primarily occupied with what your competition is doing? When you see someone else in your field succeed, do you feel genuine joy at the evidence of abundance, or do you feel a tightening in your chest, a fear that their success somehow diminishes your opportunities? These emotional responses are diagnostic. They reveal which plane you are operating on, regardless of what you might claim intellectually. The work ahead is to shift your consciousness fully and permanently to the creative plane, and that work begins with accepting that such a shift is both necessary and possible. To grasp the unshakable logic of Wattles' distinction between these two planes, consider the analogy of a sculptor versus a fighter, an image that captures with perfect clarity the fundamental difference in how wealth is approached on each plane. The competitive mind is like two fighters in a ring, circling each other with guarded intensity, each watching for an opening, each knowing that there is only one championship belt, and that for one to claim it, the other must be defeated. The entire focus of each fighter is on the other fighter, their strengths, their weaknesses, their strategy, their movements. Victory is defined not by what you create, but by what you take from your opponent, and success is inherently relative. You are successful only to the degree that you are more successful than the person you are fighting against. This is the essence of the competitive plane. Your attention is directed outward toward others. Your strategy is reactive rather than creative, and your success is measured comparatively rather than absolutely. The fighter must study their opponent obsessively, must adjust their tactics based on what the opponent does, must live in a state of constant readiness for attack or counterattack. There is no peace in this state, no rest, because the moment you lower your guard, you become vulnerable. And even if you win the belt, you have not created anything. You have simply claimed something that already existed, and now you must defend it against the next challenger. The competitive mindset is a treadmill of perpetual struggle, where each victory is temporary and each rest is dangerous. Now contrast this with the creative mind, which is like a sculptor in a studio with an infinite block of marble. The sculptor is not fighting anyone for the marble is simply there, abundant and available, limited only by the sculptor's ability to work with it. The sculptor's entire focus is not on other sculptors, but on the vision they hold in their mind, the form they intend to bring forth from the formless stone. They are not asking, how can I defeat other sculptors? They are asking, how can I most perfectly manifest the image I see in my imagination? Their success is not dependent on another's failure. It is dependent only on the clarity of their vision and the skill with which they execute that vision. The sculptor does not need to monitor what other sculptors are creating, because what they are creating is unique to them, an expression of their own consciousness that cannot be duplicated or taken by another. If another sculptor creates a masterpiece, it does not diminish the marble available to our sculptor. The block remains infinite, responsive to anyone who approaches it with vision and skill. The sculptor's work is additive to the world. They are bringing something into existence that did not exist before, enriching the total beauty and value available to humanity. The fighter's work is redistributive. They are claiming something that already existed, transferring it from one person to another, without adding anything new to the total. This analogy reveals the logical absurdity of the competitive mindset when applied to wealth creation. If wealth were truly finite, if there were only one belt of prosperity that could be held by only one person at a time, then competition would be logical and necessary. But Wattles demonstrated that wealth is not like a championship belt. It is like the marble in the sculptor's studio, infinite in supply, responsive to creative vision, and capable of being formed into an unlimited variety of valuable expressions. The person who understands this operates from an entirely different consciousness than the person who believes they must fight for their share of a limited supply. The fighter's success is dependent on another's failure. This is the inescapable logic of zero-sum competition. For you to win the belt, your opponent must lose it. For you to gain market share, your competitor must lose market share. For you to get the job, other candidates must be rejected. In this paradigm, every success story is simultaneously a failure story for someone else, and this creates a world of inherent conflict where cooperation is difficult and trust is dangerous. The competitive mindset, taken to its logical conclusion, makes enemies of everyone in your field and makes your advancement dependent on their setback. The sculptor's success, by contrast, is dependent only on the clarity of their vision and the quality of their execution. If they create a beautiful statue, it stands as a success regardless of what any other sculptor is doing. If 10 sculptors each create a masterpiece, the world now has 10 masterpieces, not one masterpiece that was fought over and claimed by the strongest. Each sculptor's work is independent, unique and additive to the total wealth of beauty in the world. This is the logic of the creative plane. Your success is absolute, not relative. It is measured by what you create, not by how you compare to others, and it is unlimited because the source from which you create is unlimited. Wattles insisted that the universe operates more like the sculptor's studio than like the fighter's ring. The formless substance from which all things are made is not a scarce resource that must be rationed and fought over. It is an infinite resource that responds to focused thought and purposeful action. When you create a new business that serves people in a way they have not been served before, you have not taken anything from anyone. You have brought something new into existence from the formless substance, adding to the total wealth of the world. When you develop a new skill that allows you to provide value in a unique way, you have not diminished anyone else's skills. You have manifested a new capacity from the infinite potential that exists within you. The unshakable logic is this: if the source of wealth is infinite, then competition for wealth is unnecessary and counterproductive. Competition makes sense only in a context of scarcity, where there is genuinely not enough for everyone and therefore some must go without. But if Wattles is correct, and he provided both logical and empirical evidence for his claim, that wealth is created from an infinite source rather than distributed from a finite supply, then competition is not only unnecessary but actively harmful, because it directs your attention away from the creative process and toward the defensive process, away from your own vision and toward others' actions, away from faith in abundance and toward fear of scarcity. The fighter cannot rest. The sculptor can rest when the day's work is done, secure in the knowledge that the marble will be there tomorrow, that no one can take their vision from them, that their success is not threatened by another sculptor's success. This is the peace that comes from operating on the creative plane. You are no longer in a race, no longer in a fight, no longer dependent on being faster or stronger than others. You are simply focused on bringing your unique vision into form, and you trust that the universe will respond to that focused creative intention with the manifestation of wealth. The analogy extends further. The fighter must become hard, guarded, and aggressive to survive in the ring. These qualities are necessary for competitive success, but corrosive to the human spirit over time. The sculptor, by contrast, can remain open, generous, and collaborative, because they are not threatened by other sculptors. In fact, they can learn from other sculptors, be inspired by their work, and even collaborate with them, because there is no scarcity of marble and no competition for a single prize. This is why Wattles taught that the creative plane not only produces greater wealth, but produces it in a way that is healthier for the individual and more beneficial for society. The logic is unshakable, because it is based on the fundamental nature of reality, as Wattles understood it. The universe is not a closed system with fixed resources, but an open system with infinite creative potential. You are not a fighter competing for scraps in a zero-sum game. You are a sculptor with access to infinite formless substance, limited only by your vision and your willingness to act upon it. The moment you truly grasp this logic, the competitive mindset begins to dissolve, because you see clearly that it is based on a false premise, the premise of scarcity, and that operating from this false premise guarantees struggle, limitation, and anxiety, while operating from the truth of abundance guarantees creativity, expansion, and peace. The fighter's world is one of constant threat. The sculptor's world is one of constant possibility. The fighter must always be ready to defend. The sculptor need only be ready to create. The fighter's energy is spent in conflict. The sculptor's energy is spent in manifestation. The fighter's success is always temporary, always threatened. The sculptor's success is permanent, a contribution to the world that cannot be taken back. Wattles did not present this as a matter of preference or personality type. He presented it as a matter of understanding the true nature of wealth and aligning your consciousness with that truth. The creative plane is not an alternative path to wealth. It is the only path to true, sustainable, peaceful wealth, and the competitive plane is a detour that leads, at best, to limited success achieved through exhausting effort, and at worst, to failure and burnout. The shift from the competitive plane to the creative plane is not accomplished through a mere decision to think differently. It requires a profound mental preparation, a restructuring of your inner state that creates the conditions for creative consciousness to flourish. The required state, the foundation upon which all else is built, is a profound sense of security. Not the false security that comes from having more than others or from being protected by competitive advantages, but the deep, unshakable security that comes from understanding that what is meant for you cannot be taken by another, because you are creating from an infinite source rather than competing for a finite supply. This security is not a feeling you wait to experience. It is a state you cultivate through understanding and practice, and it is absolutely essential because the creative process cannot operate in the presence of fear. Fear is the signature emotion of the competitive plane, the inevitable result of believing that supply is limited and that others are threats to your prosperity. As long as fear governs your consciousness, you will remain trapped in competitive thinking, constantly scanning for threats, constantly comparing yourself to others, constantly feeling the urgency to act before someone else beats you to the prize. The creative process, by contrast, requires calm, focused attention, the kind of mental state that can only exist when you are free from anxiety about what others are doing. Wattles taught that you must give up all fear of being beaten to a prize. And this is not a casual suggestion, but a fundamental requirement, because the energy of fear and the energy of creative manifestation are incompatible. They cannot coexist in the same consciousness at the same time. To cultivate this profound sense of security, you must work with your understanding until it becomes conviction. You must come to know, not merely believe intellectually, but know with certainty that the universe is not a place of scarcity where you must fight for your survival, but a place of infinite abundance where your success is guaranteed by your alignment with creative principles. This knowing comes from studying the logic of Wattles' teaching, from observing the evidence of infinite creativity in nature and human achievement, and from testing the principles in your own experience and seeing them work. Each time you act from creative consciousness, rather than competitive consciousness, and see positive results, your security deepens, your faith strengthens, and your ability to remain on the creative plane becomes more stable. The mental preparation involves a deliberate release of the competitive mindset, a conscious letting go of the habits of thought that have kept you trapped in struggle. You must examine your thoughts about others in your field and notice when you are thinking of them as rivals, as threats, as people who could take what should be yours. These thoughts, however automatic they may have become, are poison to your creative power, because they keep you focused on the external world of competition rather than the internal world of vision. Wattles taught that you must learn to see others in your field not as rivals but as fellow creators, each bringing their own unique expression into the world, each drawing from the same infinite source, each contributing to the total wealth of humanity rather than diminishing your share of a limited pie. This shift in perception is difficult because it goes against everything the competitive world has taught you. You have been conditioned to see success as relative, to measure yourself against others, to feel threatened when someone else advances. But this conditioning, while nearly universal, is based on the false premise of scarcity, and it can be unlearned through patient, persistent mental work. Every time you notice yourself feeling envy at another's success, you must catch that thought and consciously replace it with the understanding that their success is evidence of the abundance of the formless substance, proof that the universe is responsive to creative vision, and therefore encouragement that your own creative vision will also manifest when you apply the same principles. The profound sense of security you are cultivating is not arrogance or complacency. It is the calm confidence that comes from understanding how the universe actually works. It is the security of the sculptor who knows that the marble is infinite and that their unique vision can be manifested without requiring anyone else to fail. It is the security of understanding that what you are meant to create, what aligns with your unique purpose and vision, cannot be created by anyone else, and therefore cannot be taken from you by anyone else. Your role is not to protect your ideas from competitors or to rush to market before someone else does. Your role is to clarify your vision, align your consciousness with the creative principles, and act with certainty and purpose to bring that vision into form. Wattles emphasized that this security must extend to a trust in timing, a faith that all the time there is yours. The competitive mind is always in a hurry, always feeling that if you don't act immediately, you will miss your chance, that someone else will get there first and claim the prize. But the creative mind understands that true opportunity is not a race. It is a manifestation of your consciousness, and it will appear when your consciousness is ready for it. This does not mean you should be passive or lazy. It means you should be purposeful rather than frantic, focused rather than scattered, confident rather than anxious. The hurry and anxiety that characterize competitive thinking actually slow down the creative process because they fragment your attention and fill your consciousness with fear rather than faith. The mental preparation also involves developing the capacity to hold your vision clearly and consistently without being distracted by what others are doing. This is a discipline, a practice that requires conscious effort until it becomes habitual. You must train yourself to turn your attention inward to your own creative vision whenever you notice it being pulled outward to competitive comparison. You must learn to find your security not in being ahead of others, but in being aligned with your purpose, not in having more than others, but in creating what only you can create. This shift in where you locate your security is the key to the entire transformation. Because as long as your security depends on your position relative to others, you will remain on the competitive plane. But when your security comes from your connection to the infinite creative source, you have stepped onto the creative plane. The profound sense of security that enables creative consciousness is ultimately a spiritual state, a recognition that you are not a separate, isolated being fighting for survival in a hostile world, but a focal point of infinite intelligence and infinite power, capable of drawing from an inexhaustible source to create whatever you can clearly envision. Wattles taught that the formless substance is not only infinite but intelligent, responsive to thought, and personally concerned with your growth and success. When you truly grasp this, when you feel it not just as an idea but as a lived reality, fear becomes impossible, because you understand that the universe itself is supporting your creative endeavors, that you are working with the fundamental creative force of existence rather than struggling against the limitations of a finite world. This mental preparation is not completed in a day or a week. It is an ongoing practice, a continuous refinement of your consciousness, a persistent choosing of creative thoughts over competitive thoughts, of faith over fear, of vision over comparison. But every moment you spend cultivating this profound sense of security is a moment invested in your capacity for true wealth creation, because this security is the soil in which creative consciousness grows. Without it, you may have creative ideas, but you will lack the calm, focused power to bring them into manifestation. With it, you become an unstoppable force of creation, limited only by the scope of your vision and your willingness to act upon it with unwavering certainty. The execution of the shift from the competitive plane to the creative plane is accomplished through 3 specific steps, each building upon the last, each requiring conscious practice until it becomes your natural mode of operation. These are not vague principles but concrete mental operations that, when performed consistently, will permanently relocate your consciousness from the battlefield of competition to the studio of creation. The first step is to renounce the competitive mindset, and this renunciation must be deliberate, conscious, and complete. You cannot gradually reduce your competitive thinking while still holding onto it as a backup strategy. You must make a clean break, a definitive decision, that from this moment forward you will no longer think in terms of competition, no longer see others in your field as rivals, no longer measure your success by comparison to others' success or failure. This renunciation is an act of will, a choice you make and then reinforce every time your mind tries to slip back into old patterns. You must become vigilant about your thoughts, catching yourself whenever you begin to think about what your competitors are doing, whenever you feel the urge to check their websites or social media, whenever you notice yourself feeling threatened by their success or pleased by their setbacks. Each of these thoughts is a sign that you have momentarily dropped back onto the competitive plane, and each one must be consciously redirected. The renunciation is not a suppression of thoughts, but a replacement of thoughts. Instead of thinking about your competitors, you think about your vision. Instead of worrying about being beaten to market, you focus on creating something of such unique value that competition becomes irrelevant. Wattles taught that this renunciation must include a conscious decision to stop watching what others are doing with fear. It is one thing to be aware of your industry and what innovations are occurring. It is another thing entirely to obsessively monitor your competitors out of anxiety that they might be gaining an advantage. The former is simple market awareness, the latter is competitive consciousness, and it must be abandoned. You must train yourself to see others in your field not as rivals to be feared or defeated, but as fellow creators, each contributing their unique expression to the world, each serving the people they are meant to serve. This shift in perception is not naive or foolish. It is scientifically sound because it aligns your consciousness with the truth of abundance rather than the illusion of scarcity. The mental discipline required for this first step cannot be overstated. The competitive mindset is not just a thought pattern, it is a deeply ingrained habit, reinforced by years of cultural conditioning, education, and observation of how others operate. To renounce it completely requires sustained effort, a commitment to catch yourself every time you slip into competitive thinking and consciously redirect your mind to creative thinking. But this discipline is the price of admission to the creative plane, and it is a price worth paying, because the freedom and power that come from operating without the burden of competition are immeasurable. You will find that as you consistently practice this renunciation, it becomes easier, more natural, until eventually the competitive mindset loses its grip on you entirely, and you operate spontaneously from creative consciousness. The second step is to form your clear creative vision, and this is where your entire focus must turn from the outside world of competitors to the inside world of your imagination. Wattles taught that the creative process begins with a clear mental image of the wealth you wish to create. And by clear, he meant detailed, specific, vivid, and held with unwavering focus. This is not daydreaming or wishful thinking. This is the deliberate construction of a mental blueprint that will serve as the template for your manifestation. You must know exactly what you intend to create, what product or service you will offer, what value it will provide, who it will serve, how it will function, what it will look like when complete. This vision is your unique blueprint, the expression of your particular consciousness, and it is the most important asset you possess in the creative process. The clarity of your vision determines the precision of your manifestation. Vague wishes produce vague results, while clear, detailed visions produce clear, detailed results. You must spend time with your vision, refining it, adding detail to it, feeling it as if it were already real, until it becomes more vivid in your mind than your current circumstances. This is not escaping reality. This is engaging with the higher reality of creative potential, the dimension from which all manifestation emerges. Wattles insisted that this vision must be held with faith, with the absolute conviction that what you are envisioning can and will manifest when you apply the correct principles. Doubt is the enemy of creative manifestation because doubt introduces the energy of the competitive plane, the fear that maybe there isn't enough, maybe someone else will get there first, maybe you aren't capable. These doubts must be consciously rejected and replaced with the certainty that the formless substance is infinite, responsive to your thought, and perfectly capable of manifesting your vision when you align your consciousness and actions with creative principles. Your vision is not a fantasy, it is a blueprint for creation, and the universe is waiting to bring it into form through your focused intention and purposeful action. The formation of your creative vision also involves understanding your unique purpose, the particular contribution you are meant to make to the world. This is not something you invent. It is something you discover by paying attention to what excites you, what problems you feel called to solve, what value you are uniquely positioned to provide. Your vision must align with this purpose because purpose is the connection between your individual consciousness and the universal creative force. When you are creating in alignment with your purpose, you are working with the current of the universe rather than against it, and manifestation becomes natural and effortless. When you are trying to create something merely because it seems profitable or because you see others succeeding with it, you are operating from competitive consciousness, trying to take from the finite rather than create from the infinite. The third step is to act in the certain way with creative intent, and this is where vision becomes reality, through purposeful action. Wattles taught that you must act, that vision alone is not sufficient, but that your actions on the creative plane are fundamentally different from actions on the competitive plane. Your actions are no longer about beating anyone, no longer about getting to market before your competitors, no longer about positioning yourself strategically against rivals. Every action you take is taken with the sole purpose of bringing your unique vision from the invisible realm of imagination into the visible realm of manifestation. You do your work with excellence, not to be better than someone else, but to be true to your vision, to honor the blueprint you have formed in your consciousness. This means that your attention during action is focused entirely on the quality and integrity of what you are creating, not on how it compares to what others are creating. You ask yourself not, is this better than my competitor's offering, but does this perfectly express the vision I hold? The former question keeps you on the competitive plane. The latter question keeps you on the creative plane. Your standard of excellence is internal based on your vision, not external based on comparison. This is a radical shift that transforms not only your results, but your experience of work itself. Instead of the anxiety and stress of competition, you experience the joy and fulfillment of creation, the deep satisfaction that comes from bringing something into existence that reflects your unique consciousness. Wattles emphasized that action on the creative plane must be taken with certainty, with the absolute conviction that your actions are causing your vision to manifest. This certainty is not blind faith. It is the logical result of understanding the principles. If the formless substance is infinite and responsive to thought, and if you are holding a clear vision and acting purposefully to manifest it, then manifestation is not a hope but a certainty, a scientific inevitability. You act not with the desperate energy of someone trying to make something happen against the odds, but with the calm, confident energy of someone who knows they are working with universal law, that their success is guaranteed by their alignment with creative principles. The certain way also involves a specific quality of presence in your actions. You must be fully engaged in each action, giving it your complete attention and best effort, not because you are trying to impress anyone or beat anyone, but because each action is a sacred act of creation, a step in the manifestation of your vision. This quality of presence transforms ordinary work into extraordinary work, because you are infusing each action with creative consciousness, with the awareness that you are not merely doing a job, but participating in the fundamental creative process of the universe. This is why work on the creative plane is energizing, rather than depleting. You are aligned with the creative force of existence itself, and that alignment fills you with vitality and purpose. The execution of these 3 steps is not a one-time event but a continuous practice, a way of being that you must maintain through conscious choice until it becomes your automatic mode of operation. You will slip back into competitive thinking. This is inevitable, given how deeply the competitive mindset is ingrained. But each time you notice yourself slipping, you simply return to the 3 steps. Renounce the competitive thought, return to your creative vision, and take your next action with creative intent. Over time, this practice rewires your consciousness, and operating on the creative plane becomes not something you have to force, but something that flows naturally from your transformed understanding of how wealth is created. After you have begun to practice these 3 steps, there is a powerful post-technique that will accelerate your shift to the creative plane and protect you from slipping back into competitive consciousness. Wattles would call this the practice of blessing, and in practical terms it means developing the habit of responding to your competitor's success with genuine gratitude and goodwill rather than envy or fear. Whenever you see a competitor succeed, whether they launch a successful product, gain a major client, or achieve recognition in your field, instead of feeling the tightening of competitive anxiety, you consciously choose to feel genuine gratitude that this is proof of the abundance of the formless substance, evidence that the universe is responsive to creative vision, and therefore encouragement that your own vision will also manifest when you apply the same principles with the same consistency. This practice of blessing your competitor's success is not a moral platitude. It is a strategic mental technique that keeps you firmly anchored on the creative plane. When you can genuinely celebrate another's success, you are demonstrating to yourself that you truly believe in abundance, that you truly understand there is more than enough for all, that you truly operate from creative rather than competitive consciousness. Conversely, when you feel envy or fear at another's success, you are revealing to yourself that you have momentarily slipped back into scarcity thinking, into the belief that their gain is your loss, into competitive consciousness. The practice of blessing serves as both a technique for maintaining creative consciousness and a diagnostic tool for detecting when you have slipped. Wattles taught that this blessing should be more than a mental exercise. It should be a genuine feeling of goodwill, a sincere wish for others' continued success and prosperity. This is possible only when you truly understand that their success does not diminish your opportunities, because you are both drawing from an infinite source. When you see someone in your industry create something innovative and successful, Instead of thinking, "I wish I had thought of that," or "now they have an advantage over me," you think, "This is wonderful evidence that creative vision manifests into wealth, and it inspires me to bring my own unique vision into form with even greater clarity and commitment." This shift in internal response is the difference between remaining trapped in competitive anxiety and stepping fully into creative power. The practice also extends to actively supporting others in your field when appropriate, sharing their work, referring clients to them when they are a better fit, collaborating with them on projects where your visions align. This behavior, which would be foolish on the competitive plane where others are threats, is intelligent on the creative plane where others are fellow creators. When you operate from abundance, you can afford to be generous, and that generosity actually increases your own wealth by keeping you aligned with the consciousness of abundance. Wattles observed that those who hoard opportunities and guard their advantages out of fear of competition are demonstrating scarcity consciousness, and that consciousness limits their creative power, while those who share freely and support others are demonstrating abundance consciousness, and that consciousness expands their creative power. The post technique of blessing your competitors is the final safeguard against slipping back into the competitive plane. It is easy to intellectually understand the principles of creative consciousness, but still find yourself emotionally reacting with envy or fear when you see others succeed. These emotional reactions are honest feedback about your actual state of consciousness, regardless of what you believe intellectually. By consciously practicing the blessing technique every time you become aware of a competitor's success, you are training your emotional responses to align with your intellectual understanding, integrating the principles of the creative plane into your entire being, mind, emotion, and action, until operating from creative consciousness becomes not something you do, but something you are. As you work to establish yourself on the creative plane, you must be aware of the fatal mistakes that will instantly drop you back onto the competitive plane and shut off your creative power like a circuit breaker cutting electricity to a machine. These mistakes are subtle, often disguised as prudence or intelligence, and for this reason they are more dangerous than obvious errors. The first and most insidious of these mistakes, the one I promise to reveal, the one that most people consider a sign of wisdom, is the habit of hurry. Rushing, feeling hurried, and acting out of anxiety are the unmistakable signs of the competitive mind, and they are absolutely incompatible with creative consciousness. When you find yourself in a state of hurry, feeling that you must act quickly or you will miss your opportunity, feeling that if you don't get to market first, someone else will claim what should be yours, you have dropped back onto the competitive plane, and all your actions from that state will produce competitive rather than creative results. The habit of hurry is rooted in the fear that time is limited, that opportunities are scarce, that you are in a race against others and must therefore move faster than they do to win. This is pure competitive consciousness, the antithesis of everything Wattles taught about the creative plane. The creative mind, by contrast, is calm and confident, operating from the certainty that all the time there is yours, that true opportunity is not a race, but a manifestation of consciousness, and that what is meant for you will come to you when your consciousness is ready for it. The moment you feel yourself rushing, you have abandoned creative consciousness and adopted competitive consciousness, and you must stop, breathe, and consciously return to the calm certainty of the creative plane. Wattles was emphatic about this point. Hurry is not efficiency, it is anxiety. True efficiency comes from calm, focused action, from doing each thing with full attention and excellent execution, from moving purposefully rather than frantically. When you hurry, you scatter your energy, you make mistakes, you act from fear rather than vision, and you align yourself with the consciousness of scarcity rather than abundance. The universe does not respond to hurry. It responds to clear vision held with unwavering faith and expressed through purposeful action. When you hurry, you are essentially telling the universe that you don't trust its abundance, that you believe in scarcity, that you are competing rather than creating, and the universe will respond by giving you more experiences of scarcity and competition. This is why the habit of hurry is so fatal. It is a complete reversal of the consciousness required for creative manifestation. You cannot hold a clear vision while you are hurrying, because hurry fragments your attention. You cannot act with certainty while you are hurrying, because hurry is the expression of doubt and fear. You cannot maintain faith in infinite abundance while you are hurrying, because hurry is the behavior of someone who believes there is not enough time, not enough opportunity, not enough supply. Every moment spent in the state of hurry is a moment spent reinforcing competitive consciousness and weakening creative consciousness. And if you allow hurry to become your habitual state, you will find yourself permanently trapped on the competitive plane, regardless of how well you understand the principles intellectually. The antidote to hurry is the practice of calm, purposeful action, the discipline of doing one thing at a time with full attention and excellent execution, trusting that each action is moving you toward your vision and that the timing of manifestation is perfect. When you notice yourself beginning to hurry, you must consciously slow down, breathe deeply, reconnect with your vision, and remind yourself that you are creating from an infinite source, that there is no race, that what is yours cannot be taken by another. This practice is not easy, especially in a culture that glorifies speed and busyness, but it is absolutely essential if you are to remain on the creative plane and access your full creative power. The second fatal mistake is the habit of copying others, looking at what is successful for someone else, and trying to replicate it in your own work. This is inherently competitive thinking disguised as smart strategy. When you copy what others are doing, you are operating from the premise that wealth exists in finite forms that must be claimed, that success comes from doing what successful people do, that innovation is risky and imitation is safe. But Wattles taught that the creative plane is accessed through originality, through bringing forth something new that reflects your unique vision and serves a unique purpose. When you copy, you are not creating. You are competing for a share of a market that someone else has already created, and you will always be at a disadvantage because you are not the originator. The creative mind seeks to create something new, to bring forth a unique vision that serves a purpose in a way that has not been done before. This does not mean you must reinvent the wheel or ignore what others have learned. It means your fundamental orientation must be toward innovation rather than imitation, toward expressing your unique consciousness rather than copying someone else's expression. When you are truly operating on the creative plane, you are not asking, "What are successful people doing that I can do too?" You are asking, "What unique value can I create that the world needs and that only I can provide in exactly this way?" The former question keeps you on the competitive plane. The latter question keeps you on the creative plane. Copying is attractive because it seems to reduce risk. If something worked for someone else, surely it will work for you. But this logic is flawed because it ignores the fundamental principle that wealth on the creative plane comes from expressing your unique consciousness, from creating something that aligns with your particular purpose and vision. When you copy someone else's success, you are trying to manifest their vision rather than your own, and this misalignment with your true purpose will limit your results and leave you feeling unfulfilled even if you achieve some measure of success. Wattles taught that each person has a unique contribution to make, a particular expression of the infinite creative force that only they can bring forth, and that true wealth comes from discovering and expressing this unique contribution rather than imitating others' contributions. The habit of copying also keeps you perpetually one step behind the originators, always reacting to what they create rather than creating proactively from your own vision. This is a competitive position, a position of weakness because you are dependent on others to show you what works before you can act. The creative mind, by contrast, leads rather than follows, originates rather than imitates, and therefore commands the premium that the market always pays for true innovation. When you are creating something genuinely new and valuable, you have no competition, because no one else is creating exactly what you are creating. You have made competition irrelevant by operating in a space of your own creation. The masters understood these pitfalls intimately, and Wattles articulated them with a clarity that has never been surpassed. His most powerful teaching on this subject can be distilled into two essential quotes that every serious student of wealth must internalize. The first is this: you are not trying to get anything away from anyone. You are not trying to get someone else's job, or someone else's money, or someone else's customers. You are creating. You are bringing something into existence that was not there before. You do not have to beat anyone in business. You are not in competition with anyone. These words, simple as they appear, contain the entire philosophy of the creative plane compressed into a few sentences. When Wattles says you are not trying to get anything away from anyone, he is directly contradicting the fundamental assumption of competitive consciousness, the assumption that wealth is a redistribution of existing resources rather than a creation of new value. The competitive mind is always trying to get something that someone else has or might have: their market share, their customers, their position, their success. The creative mind is focused entirely on bringing something new into existence, on manifesting a vision that adds to the total wealth of the world rather than claiming a piece of existing wealth. This is not semantics. This is a description of two fundamentally different processes that produce fundamentally different results. When Wattles says you do not have to beat anyone in business, he is liberating you from the exhausting burden of competition, from the constant vigilance and anxiety that comes from seeing others as threats. You do not have to be better than your competitors. You have to be true to your vision. You do not have to win a race. You have to create something of value. You do not have to defend your position. You have to expand your creative capacity. This shift in focus, from external competition to internal creation, is the key to accessing the infinite power of the creative plane, because it aligns your consciousness with the truth of how wealth is actually created, rather than the illusion of how it must be fought for. The second essential quote from Wattles is equally powerful. No one is kept in poverty by a shortness in the supply of riches. There is more than enough for all. This statement directly addresses the root fear that drives all competitive behavior. The fear that there is not enough, that if others succeed, there will be less for you, that you must therefore fight to secure your share before it is claimed by others. Wattles is declaring, with the authority of one who has tested these principles and found them true, that this fear is based on a false premise. The supply of riches is not short, it is infinite. No one's poverty is caused by others having too much. Poverty is caused by failing to align one's consciousness with the creative principles that draw wealth from the infinite source. This understanding, when truly grasped, eliminates envy, eliminates the resentment of others' success, eliminates the fear that drives competitive behavior. If there is more than enough for all, then another's gain is not your loss. It is simply evidence that the principles work, proof that the formless substance is responsive to creative vision, and therefore encouragement that you too can manifest wealth when you apply the same principles. Wattles is not asking you to be naive or to ignore the reality of poverty. He is explaining that poverty is not caused by scarcity of supply, but by scarcity of understanding, by operating from competitive consciousness rather than creative consciousness, by trying to get rather than trying to create. These two quotes together form a complete philosophy of wealth that stands in direct opposition to everything the competitive world teaches. The competitive world teaches that wealth is limited, that you must fight for your share, that others' success threatens your opportunities, that you must be vigilant and aggressive to secure your position. Wattles teaches that wealth is unlimited, that you create your share through vision and action, that others' success proves the abundance of the source, that you must be calm and focused to access your creative power. The competitive world produces anxiety, envy, and exhaustion. Wattles' teaching produces peace, gratitude, and sustainable success. To internalize these quotes is not merely to memorize words, but to allow them to restructure your entire relationship with wealth. You must meditate on them, test them against your experience, observe the world through the lens they provide until they become not ideas you hold, but truths you know. When you truly understand that you are not trying to get anything away from anyone, you stop seeing others as threats and start seeing them as fellow creators. When you truly understand that there is more than enough for all, you stop feeling anxious about competition and start feeling confident in your creative power. These shifts in understanding produce corresponding shifts in behavior, and those behavioral shifts produce different results that confirm the truth of the principles, which deepens your understanding, which produces more aligned behavior, in an upward spiral of increasing creative power and manifested wealth. Wattles also provided practical guidance for maintaining your position on the creative plane once you have achieved it. He taught that you must guard your consciousness carefully, that you must be vigilant about what thoughts you allow to occupy your mind, because thoughts are the seeds of manifestation, and you will reap what you sow in consciousness. If you allow competitive thoughts to dominate your mind, thoughts of rivalry, comparison, fear, and scarcity, you will manifest competitive results, struggle, limitation, and anxiety. If you cultivate creative thoughts, thoughts of vision, purpose, abundance, and certainty, you will manifest creative results, innovation, expansion, and peace. This is why Wattles emphasized the importance of daily mental discipline, of taking time each day to reconnect with your vision, to remind yourself of the principles to consciously choose creative thoughts over competitive thoughts. This is not a luxury for those who have time. It is a necessity for those who are serious about operating on the creative plane. The competitive world will constantly attempt to pull you back into its consciousness through news of competitors' actions, through cultural messages of scarcity, through the example of others who operate from fear and struggle. You must have a daily practice that keeps you anchored in creative consciousness, that reminds you of the truth of abundance, that reconnects you with your vision and purpose. The Master's tips are not complicated, but they require consistent application. They require that you become the guardian of your own consciousness, that you take responsibility for what thoughts you entertain and what thoughts you reject. They require that you trust the principles even when circumstances seem to contradict them, that you maintain your faith in the infinite source even when you see others struggling with scarcity. They require that you act from vision rather than from fear, from abundance rather than from lack, from creation rather than from competition, every single day, in every decision, until this way of operating becomes so natural that you cannot imagine going back to the competitive consciousness that once seemed normal. The principles Wattles taught over a century ago have been rediscovered and validated by modern business strategists, though often without acknowledgement of the source or full understanding of the depth of the original teaching. One of the most famous contemporary business concepts that directly parallels Wattles' creative plane is what strategists Jan Kim and René Mauborgne termed Blue Ocean Strategy, a framework that has become required study in business schools around the world and has transformed how the most innovative companies approach their markets. The parallels between Blue Ocean Strategy and Wattles' creative plane are not coincidental. They are the inevitable rediscovery of universal principles that govern wealth creation, principles that Wattles articulated with greater clarity and depth than most modern business theorists. Blue Ocean Strategy teaches that the most successful companies don't compete in bloody red oceans of competition, where multiple companies fight for the same customers in the same markets with similar offerings, driving down prices and profits through intense rivalry. Instead, the most successful companies create blue oceans of uncontested market space, where they make the competition irrelevant by creating something so new and valuable that they effectively create their own market, a space where they are the only player and can therefore command premium prices and enjoy high profitability without the stress and cost of competitive warfare. This is a modern MBA-level rediscovery of the creative plane that Wattles taught over a century ago. The understanding that true wealth comes from creation rather than competition, from innovation rather than imitation, from making your own space rather than fighting for existing space. The red ocean in this framework is precisely what Wattles called the competitive plane, a space of limited opportunity where success requires beating others, where profit margins are squeezed by rivalry, where constant vigilance and aggressive tactics are necessary just to maintain position. Companies operating in red oceans are fighters in the ring, battling for market share, constantly comparing themselves to competitors, constantly reacting to competitors' moves, trapped in a zero-sum game where one company's gain is another company's loss. The stress, the anxiety, the exhaustion of red ocean competition is exactly what Wattles described as the inevitable result of operating on the competitive plane, and modern business research has confirmed that companies trapped in red oceans struggle with low profitability, high stress and constant vulnerability to competitive threats. The blue ocean, by contrast, is precisely what Wattles called the creative plane, a space of unlimited opportunity where success comes from creating new value rather than fighting for existing value, where profit margins are high because there is no direct competition, where the company can focus on innovation and excellence rather than on competitive positioning. Companies that create blue oceans are sculptors in the studio, focused on bringing their unique vision into form, creating something that didn't exist before, serving customers in ways they haven't been served before, making competition irrelevant not by beating competitors, but by transcending the entire competitive paradigm. The peace, the profitability, the sustainability of blue ocean strategy is exactly what Wattles described as the inevitable result of operating on the creative plane. What makes this parallel so striking is that blue ocean strategy was developed through rigorous academic research, through studying hundreds of companies and identifying the patterns that distinguish the most successful from the merely competitive, and the researchers independently arrived at conclusions that Wattles had articulated through pure insight and principle a century earlier. This convergence of ancient wisdom and modern research is powerful validation that Wattles was not offering mere philosophy or motivational platitudes, but describing actual laws of wealth creation that operate consistently across time, culture, and industry. The principles of the creative plane are not beliefs to be accepted on faith. They are realities to be tested and proven through application. Modern business strategists have identified specific techniques for creating blue oceans, and these techniques are entirely consistent with Wattles' teaching about the creative plane. The core technique is what they call value innovation, which means simultaneously pursuing differentiation and low cost by creating a new value proposition that makes the traditional trade-off between the two irrelevant. This is accomplished not by benchmarking against competitors and trying to beat them at their own game, but by looking beyond the existing industry boundaries to understand what customers truly value and then creating a new offering that delivers that value in a way no one else is delivering it. This is creative thinking rather than competitive thinking, vision-based strategy rather than rivalry-based strategy, exactly what Wattles taught about forming a clear creative vision and bringing it into manifestation. The Blue Ocean Strategy Framework also emphasizes the importance of execution, of not just having a creative strategy, but implementing it with excellence and consistency. This parallels Wattles' teaching about acting in the certain way, about taking purposeful action to manifest your vision, about doing your work with excellence not to beat others, but to be true to your vision. The researchers found that companies that successfully create blue oceans don't just have good ideas. They execute those ideas with disciplined action, with clear focus, with unwavering commitment to their vision, even when others don't initially understand or appreciate what they're creating. This is the same quality of action Wattles described as essential for creative manifestation. Perhaps most importantly, Blue Ocean Strategy validates Wattles' teaching that creative thinking produces better results than competitive thinking, not just in terms of subjective experience, but in terms of objective, measurable business outcomes. The research shows that companies that create blue oceans enjoy higher growth, higher profitability, and longer-term sustainability than companies trapped in red ocean competition. They are not just happier, they are wealthier, more successful, more resilient. This is exactly what Wattles promised, that the creative plane produces superior results to the competitive plane, that creation is not just more peaceful than competition, but more profitable. That aligning with the principles of infinite abundance is not just spiritually satisfying, but practically effective. The fact that modern business strategists have independently rediscovered and validated Wattles' principles should give you tremendous confidence in applying them. You are not being asked to accept an untested theory or to gamble on an unproven philosophy. You are being invited to align yourself with principles that have been proven across more than a century in countless industries, by companies ranging from small startups to global corporations. The creative plane is not a nice idea. It is a description of how wealth is actually created by those who understand the principles, and Blue Ocean Strategy is simply one contemporary articulation of those same principles, dressed in the language of modern business, but describing the same fundamental reality that Wattles revealed. To make these principles concrete and visible, consider the example of Cirque du Soleil, one of the most famous case studies in blue ocean strategy, and a perfect illustration of what it means to operate on the creative plane. In the 1980s, the circus industry was a classic red ocean, a dying industry characterized by intense competition, declining audiences, rising costs, and shrinking profits. Traditional circuses competed with each other by trying to have the most famous performers, the most exotic animals, the most spectacular acts, all while fighting for a shrinking pool of customers who were increasingly turning to other forms of entertainment. It was a perfect example of the competitive plane, multiple companies fighting for limited resources in a declining market, each trying to beat the others at the same game, all struggling with the same fundamental problem of scarcity. Cirque du Soleil, founded by Guy Laliberté and a group of street performers, could have entered this red ocean and tried to compete with established circuses by doing what they did, but better, faster, or cheaper. This would have been the competitive approach, the approach most business advisors would have recommended, the approach that seemed safe and logical. But Laliberté and his team did something radically different. They created a blue ocean by reimagining what a circus could be, by creating a new form of entertainment that blended circus arts with theater, music, and storytelling in a way that had never been done before. Instead of competing with other circuses for a shrinking audience, they created a new market, attracting people who had never been interested in traditional circuses and were willing to pay premium prices for this new form of artistic entertainment. The specific choices Cirque du Soleil made are instructive because they demonstrate the creative thinking that characterizes the creative plane. Instead of trying to have the most famous star performers like traditional circuses, they eliminated star performers entirely, creating ensemble productions where the show itself was the star. Instead of using animals, which were expensive, controversial, and increasingly problematic, they eliminated animals entirely and focused on human artistry and athleticism. Instead of having multiple rings with simultaneous acts competing for attention, they used a single ring with focused theatrical presentations. Instead of targeting children and families like traditional circuses, they targeted adults willing to pay theater prices for sophisticated entertainment. Each of these choices moved them away from the red ocean of traditional circus competition and into the blue ocean of uncontested market space. What makes this example so powerful is that Cirque du Soleil didn't just create a slightly different circus. They created something so new that the competition became irrelevant. Traditional circuses couldn't compete with them because they were no longer playing the same game. Cirque du Soleil wasn't trying to be the best circus. They were creating a new category of entertainment that made the question, which circus is best, obsolete. This is exactly what Wattles meant by operating on the creative plane. You're not trying to beat your competitors at their game. You're creating a new game where you're the only player, where your success is independent of anyone else's success or failure, where you're drawing from the infinite source of creative possibility rather than fighting for a share of a finite market. The results speak for themselves. While traditional circuses struggled and many went out of business, Cirque du Soleil grew into a global phenomenon, performing in hundreds of cities, generating billions in revenue, creating thousands of jobs, and becoming one of the most successful entertainment companies in the world. They didn't achieve this success by being better competitors. They achieved it by making competition irrelevant, by operating on a different plane entirely. Their success didn't come at the expense of other circuses. It came from creating new value that hadn't existed before, from serving customers in ways they hadn't been served before, from bringing a unique vision into manifestation that added to the total wealth and beauty in the world. This example demonstrates several key principles of the creative plane. First, it shows that you don't need to accept the limitations of your industry or market. You can transcend those limitations by thinking creatively rather than competitively. Second, it shows that creating something new and valuable is often more profitable than competing in existing markets, because you can command premium prices when you're offering something unique. Third, it shows that making competition irrelevant is not a fantasy, but a practical strategy that has been executed successfully by real companies in real markets. Fourth, it shows that the creative plane is not about ignoring market realities, but about seeing possibilities that others miss because they're trapped in competitive thinking. The Cirque du Soleil story also illustrates the courage required to operate on the creative plane. Laliberté and his team could have played it safe, could have tried to create a traditional circus and compete with established players, could have followed the conventional wisdom of their industry. But they chose to trust their vision, to create something new even when others didn't understand it, to operate from creative consciousness even when competitive consciousness would have seemed more prudent. This courage is essential for anyone who wants to operate on the creative plane, because the creative plane requires you to go beyond what has been done before, to trust principles that most people don't understand, to act on vision rather than on comparison to others. The example also shows that operating on the creative plane doesn't mean ignoring customers or market needs. It means understanding those needs at a deeper level than your competitors do and creating innovative solutions that serve those needs in new ways. Cirque du Soleil succeeded, not because they ignored what audiences wanted, but because they understood what audiences truly valued: artistry, beauty, storytelling, spectacle, and delivered it in a way that was more aligned with contemporary tastes than traditional circuses were. This is the kind of insight that comes from creative consciousness, from focusing on vision and value rather than on competitive positioning and market share. Finally, the Cirque du Soleil example demonstrates that the principles of the creative plane work in any industry, even industries that seem to be dying or hopelessly competitive. If creative thinking can transform something as traditional and declining as the circus industry, it can certainly transform whatever industry you're in. The question is not whether the creative plane can work in your situation. The question is whether you're willing to shift your consciousness from competitive to creative, from fighting for existing value to creating new value, from being a fighter in the ring to being a sculptor in the studio with infinite marble at your disposal. The time has come to synthesize everything you have learned into a unified understanding of your power and your choice. The struggle for wealth, the exhausting race against competitors, the anxiety about being beaten to opportunities, all of this is a choice, not a necessity, a prison of consciousness that you can walk out of the moment you understand that the door was never locked. You have been taught by culture, by education, by the example of those around you that competition is inevitable, that you must fight for your share of a limited supply, that for you to win, someone else must lose. But Wallace D. Wattles revealed a scientific truth that liberates you from this prison. Wealth is not a finite resource to be fought over, but an infinite creative power to be accessed through vision and action. You can choose to remain on the competitive plane, fighting for scraps, measuring yourself against others, living in constant anxiety about whether you're ahead or behind, whether you're winning or losing the race. This choice will produce results, perhaps even significant results if you're particularly skilled at competition, but it will produce them at the cost of your peace, your joy, and your full creative potential. The competitive plane is a treadmill that never stops, a race that never ends, a battle that never concludes in lasting victory, because there is always another competitor, another threat, another challenge to your position. It is the hard way, the exhausting way, the way of effort and limitation. Or you can choose to elevate your mind to the creative plane and become a source of new wealth rather than a fighter for existing wealth. This choice requires a fundamental shift in consciousness, a letting go of competitive thinking and a commitment to creative thinking, a movement from fear to faith, from scarcity to abundance, from comparison to vision. It requires the discipline to catch yourself when you slip into competitive thoughts and consciously redirect your mind to creative thoughts. It requires the courage to trust principles that most people don't understand and to act on vision rather than on comparison to others. But this choice, while demanding, produces results that are not only greater, but sustainable, not only profitable, but peaceful, not only successful, but fulfilling. The creative plane is not an escape from reality. It is an alignment with the deeper reality of how wealth is actually created. When you study the most successful individuals and companies throughout history, you find that they were not the best competitors, but the most creative innovators. They were not fighting for existing markets, but creating new markets. They were not trying to beat others at their game, but creating new games where they were the only players. They were operating, whether they articulated it this way or not, on the creative plane, drawing from the infinite source of creative possibility rather than fighting for a share of finite resources. Your power lies in your ability to choose your plane of operation, to decide whether you will be a fighter or a creator, whether you will see the world as a place of scarcity or abundance, whether you will measure your success by comparison to others or by alignment with your vision. This is not a small choice. It is the most important choice you will make in your pursuit of wealth, because it determines not only your results, but your experience of the journey, not only what you achieve, but who you become in the process. The fighter becomes hard, guarded, anxious. The creator becomes open, generous, confident. The fighter's success is always threatened. The creator's success is always expanding. The rat race is a prison of the mind, a collective hallucination that billions of people accept as reality simply because everyone around them accepts it as reality. But today, you have been given the key to this prison, and that key is understanding. You now understand that the race is optional, that competition is a choice, that the supply of wealth is infinite rather than finite, that you can create rather than compete, that your success is independent of others' success or failure. This understanding, when truly grasped and consistently applied, transforms everything about your relationship with wealth, work, and others in your field. The source of all wealth is infinite, and this is not a metaphor or a comforting belief, but a description of reality that has been validated by both ancient wisdom and modern science. The formless substance that Wattles described, the creative power that responds to focused thought and purposeful action, is not a limited resource that must be rationed and fought over. It is an inexhaustible source that responds not to your struggle, but to your vision, not to your anxiety, but to your certainty, not to your comparison with others, but to your clarity about what you intend to create. When you align your consciousness with this truth, when you operate from this understanding, you step out of the rat race and into the creation studio, where your only limitation is the scope of your imagination and your willingness to act upon it. Stop looking over your shoulder at your competitors. Stop obsessing about what they're doing. Stop feeling threatened by their success or pleased by their failures. These competitive thoughts are not helping you. They are limiting you, keeping you trapped on the competitive plane where struggle is inevitable and scarcity is the governing principle. Look forward instead into your imagination, into the vision of the wealth you are about to create, into the unique contribution you are meant to make to the world. This is where your power lies, in your creative vision, not in your competitive positioning. This is where your peace lies, in your connection to the infinite source, not in your comparison to finite others. The pie is not finite. You are the baker. This simple statement contains the entire philosophy of the creative plane, compressed into a single metaphor. On the competitive plane, you're fighting with others for slices of a pie that someone else baked, and the more slices others get, the less is available for you. On the creative plane, you're not fighting for slices. You're baking your own pie, one that reflects your unique recipe, serves your unique customers, and adds to the total abundance of pies in the world. Your pie doesn't diminish anyone else's pie, it increases the total supply of pies. And because you're the baker, you're not limited by what others are doing. You're limited only by your skill, your vision, and your willingness to work. This shift from slice taker to pie baker is the shift from competitive consciousness to creative consciousness, from scarcity mindset to abundance mindset, from fighter to creator. It is the shift that Wattles taught, that the masters have always known, that modern business strategists are rediscovering, and that you are now equipped to make in your own life and work. The question is not whether you can make this shift. The question is whether you will make this shift, whether you will choose the creative plane over the competitive plane, whether you will trust the principles enough to apply them consistently even when the competitive world tries to pull you back. You have the power to create wealth from the infinite source, to bring into manifestation whatever you can clearly envision and act upon with certainty. You have the power to make your competition irrelevant by creating something so unique and valuable that you transcend the entire competitive paradigm. You have the power to experience wealth creation not as struggle, but as joy, not as anxiety, but as confidence, not as a race against others, but as an expression of your unique creative potential. This power has always been yours. You simply needed to understand it, to claim it, to align your consciousness with it through the principles and practices you have learned today. I now offer you a practical challenge, a way to test these principles in your own experience and prove to yourself that the creative plane is not theory, but reality. For 1 week, starting today, I challenge you to go on what I call a competition fast. For 7 days, you will not check your competitors' social media accounts, websites, or pricing. You will not monitor what they're doing, what they're launching, how they're positioning themselves. You will not allow your mind to occupy itself with competitive thoughts, with comparison, with anxiety about what they might be doing that you're not doing. This is a fast, a deliberate abstention from the mental food of competition that has been nourishing your scarcity consciousness. During this competition fast, you will redirect all the time and energy you would have spent monitoring competitors toward 2 creative activities. First, you will spend time each day clarifying your own vision, refining your mental image of the wealth you intend to create, adding detail and specificity to your blueprint until it becomes so vivid that you can feel it as if it already exists. Second, you will spend time improving your own service or product, making it more valuable, more aligned with your vision, more reflective of the unique contribution you're meant to make. Every moment you would have spent looking at what others are doing, you will instead spend on what you are creating. The goal of this challenge is not merely to be more productive, though you likely will be. The goal is to experience the peace and power that come from a purely creative focus, to feel the difference between competitive consciousness and creative consciousness in your own mind and body. You will likely notice that as you stop feeding your mind with competitive thoughts, anxiety begins to diminish. You will likely notice that as you focus on your own vision rather than others' actions, clarity begins to increase. You will likely notice that as you pour your energy into creation, rather than comparison, joy begins to emerge. These are not subjective experiences without practical value. They are the signs that you are shifting to the creative plane, and they will be accompanied by practical results in your work and wealth. At the end of the 7 days, you will assess the results. Did you accomplish more or less than you typically accomplish when you're monitoring competitors? Did you feel more or less anxious? Did you have more or fewer creative insights? Did your work improve in quality? Did you experience more or less peace? The answers to these questions will provide you with personal, empirical evidence about which plane of consciousness produces better results for you. You don't have to take Wattles' word for it or my word for it. You can test it yourself and let your own experience be your teacher. This competition fast is not meant to be a one-time experiment, but a gateway to a new way of operating, a taste of what life on the creative plane feels like, so that you'll be motivated to make the shift permanent. If you find, as I expect you will, that the week of creative focus produces better results and better experiences than your typical pattern of competitive focus, then you have discovered something invaluable. That the creative plane is not only theoretically superior but practically superior, that it works not just in principle but in practice, that you can actually create more wealth with less stress by shifting your consciousness from competition to creation. If you are ready to exit the rat race permanently, if you are ready to make your competition completely irrelevant, if you are ready to become a master of creation rather than a fighter for scraps, then I invite you to subscribe to the Master's Legacy. This channel is dedicated to exploring the profound teachings of the great masters of the mind, the principles and practices that the most successful and fulfilled individuals throughout history have used to create extraordinary results. By subscribing, you're not just getting more videos. You're committing to your own transformation, to learning to operate on the creative plane, to becoming the sculptor rather than the fighter, the baker rather than the slice taker. The choice is yours, and the consequences of that choice will unfold in every area of your life. You can continue to operate as you have been, fighting for your share of a limited supply, measuring yourself against others, living in the anxiety of competition. Or you can choose today to shift to the creative plane, to align your consciousness with the infinite source of wealth, to become a creator of new value rather than a fighter for existing value. The principles are clear, the path is laid out, the examples are provided. Now it is up to you to take the first step, to make the commitment, to begin the practice that will transform not only your wealth, but your entire experience of life. The creative plane awaits those who are ready to stop fighting and start creating, and your willingness to take the competition fast challenge is the sign that you are ready.